Hi, welcome back to Space Cadets. Appreciate you all being here. Today we're going to talk about Ubiquiti and the Unifi products, specifically better understanding their network infrastructure. And Ubiquiti, Unifi work in a bit of a different sort of way. They are kind of an in-between, consumer grade equipment and really hardcore enterprise. And so they fit a nice prosumer and small, medium business space. And they've actually got a lot of great products, but they work and operate in a different sort of way. They really like to focus on kind of a single pane of glass approach where they want you to have as much of their equipment, frankly, in your infrastructure as possible. And they have an overarching software controlling tool that manages a lot of their networking equipment. So I'm going to kind of walk through this with some very basic drawing because I'm a little bit more of a visual learner, and hopefully that is helpful to kind of contextualize this. So the Unifi setup is similar to what you see in a more kind of business-oriented or enterprise-grade environment, and that it's breaking down your devices into more discrete components, allows you to scale much more effectively. So what about Unifi? What about Ubiquiti that's a little bit discrete? Or what do you need to understand beyond this? So first and foremost, if you're making purchasing decisions, right, you have to understand the different devices, because Unifi doesn't make one router. Unifi doesn't make one switch. They don't make one access point. They have a lot of different devices. And so it's important to understand that when you're making your purchasing decisions, you're understanding you need these components, right? And then you need to understand and make selections within those component categories to get the right devices. So that's one piece. Now, from a router perspective, Unifi has a bunch of different options. But generally speaking, if you're talking about a router, now you've got the Dream Machine, you've got the UDM-Pro, which is the Dream Machine Pro, you've got the Cloud Key, etc. They have a few different options. And when you get into the switches, they have 8-port switches, they have 24-port, 16-port, they have PoE, they have non-PoE, they have Pro and non-Pro. There's a lot of different options. And then when you get into the APs, same type of thing, right? You've got my personal favorite, the U6 Lite, which is a monster for a low cost. You've got, the U6 Pro, you've got U6 Mesh. They just have a whole bunch of different options. So first and foremost, you need to design your infrastructure at a high level, and then you can start to get into the details of the low level, particular components. And what I mean by designing your infrastructure at a high level, you need to understand that you need these core components. You need to understand the physical layout that you're expecting to put them in, as well as where you're expecting end devices to want to connect, either from a physical, cable or, via Wi-Fi. And then you got to start to select the devices that allow you to achieve that end goal, right, in a way that fits with your budget and, still ensures you have all the core items. So we have all this. Now, again, nothing too unexpected. So where do things get a bit unique? What aspects of Unifi are, kind of core to that experience? And really that comes down to the Unifi Network controller, understanding what that is. All right. Hopefully you're still following. Hopefully my drawing hasn't, made this unintelligible or more confusing for you. Well, we're going to get into a little bit of the Unifi Network controller, and that is, a key part. It's the single pane of glass that you'll hear referred to sometimes for the Ubiquiti infrastructure. So I'm going to come back and do, another sort of basic diagram. We're not going to focus on end devices here. We're going to focus on your network infrastructure. You're going to focus on the router, switches, APs, etc. Because the Unifi Network controller effectively is a software application that's going to sit on top of this. And on top is maybe not the right description, but and it can do this in two ways. So this can be managed. This could be set up as a cloud tool, right? So, you're going to manage it in the cloud. And that means it doesn't have to be locally on site, so it's constantly sending information back and forth. And traditionally, for the last several years, this was a very common sort of setup where you would have a cloud-based controller. It might be a virtual machine that you have on AWS or Azure or whatever it may be, but you could have a cloud device, or you could set it up and you could have a local controller. Now, there are lots of ways to do this as well, and generally, and if it was a local controller, you would see this, connected directly to the router, right, in this scenario. Now, let's explain this a little bit, right? So this is going to be oftentimes a virtual machine, a virtual computer, right? That, maybe Microsoft or Amazon or any number of companies might create a virtual machine, or even, a company creating this within their own server infrastructure. A local controller is going to be a device physically on a given location, and that could be a Ubiquiti device. That could be a Raspberry Pi, though I think generally speaking, that's more of like a hobbyist and kind of fun experiment, but I wouldn't recommend having that infrastructure managed in that way. It could be on just any random PC or Mac computer, and it'll run that software, be connected to your router, and really what that software is doing is it's kind of pulling the information together. And so I'm going to show you for a local device as well as a cloud-based virtual machine. All right. So we've made it through kind of the network basics starter, right? We've talked a little bit about the Unifi networking equipment, right, that you would build out from the router, or the gateway as it's called, to switches to the access points. So let's talk and get into the network controller in more detail. I'm going to show a screen share here and kind of walk you through, and I've got two examples of the Unifi network controller that you can see. And this is going to actually speak to kind of a few things that are going on in terms of what Unifi is trying to work towards, and just kind of understanding a little bit of some of the direction that they're focused on. So what I have here, I've got two things that I wanted to talk through. So first, this is a local UDM-Pro based system. This is actually my house, the way that I've set this up. So I've got a UDM-Pro. Again, this is a device. It actually does do a little bit of dual function because it is running the router. It is the router, right, kind of directing traffic between the devices and the internet. And it is also a small switch. There are multiple ports that you can connect into this. I have separately a 24-port PoE switch, and then a number of APs that are through the house, as well as a few additional cameras and things that connect into this. And I'm not going to get into the camera side of this, but it'll come back a little bit later when we talk about the Ubiquiti direction overall. So this is the Dream Machine. Now, this is the top level view that includes multiple applications, but if we go into the networking application, this is what the network application looks like. This is the network controller. And it's important to understand the network controller does a number of things, but specifically it's, a few key pieces of functionality are: it manages the firmware updating and provisioning of new network hardware, so new switches, new access points, etc. They have to be adopted into the network controller when you first connect them, and it then sets up all of the Wi-Fi configurations, the network configurations. It manages any type of authentication or filtering that you may want to have. You can set up to have a schedule for your firmware updates for your devices, and so it kind of gives you this administrative overview of your network infrastructure to be able to go and keep track of everything. And because this is a full Unifi system here, where it's the router, the switch, the access points, etc., it has a pretty comprehensive view of lots of different things that are going on. So I can see details around the type of traffic that's occurring. I can see what types of devices are connecting. I can see a little bit of information around my access points. And there's lots of additional information here. So it'll show me, this nice sharp view of, what devices do I have connected? How are they connected? You can modify some of this information. So for instance, I can go and I can make it so it'll show me if it's hardwired, what ports it's connected to, etc. So a lot of really good sort of functionality. So any device I can click onto and I can see details around how it's connected. So in this instance, this is a hardwired connection. Now the Fire TV Cube I have only has 100 megabits per second port, so that's not Unifi side, that's not full gigabit. I can see details for every device around what type of traffic. So apparently, we watch a lot of Netflix in our house. I'm not surprised. We got 2 small kids that go nuts, and my wife and I are TV, big TV watchers as well. And you can modify and manage things at a device level. And so again, this is kind of an end-to-end Unifi system that's in place. And it has a lot of really nice functionality. I can see, in essence, everything on my network. I can manage and configure everything on my network from this single web-based management console. Now, this is run from the UDM-Pro device specifically. And the network controller can be run from a few different devices. The UDM-Pro, the Dream machine itself, the Dream router, cloud keys, etc. Those are all Unifi Ubiquiti devices, and they all run this networking application specifically. And so I can see lots of different details around this. And if I get into the administration side of things, I'm able to set up and configure a number of different items. So I can have discrete wireless networks, and I do that because we like to separate devices. We have a few different ways that we've set this up. I can set up specific networks and VLANs, etc. So it's beyond a traditional consumer grade router in that it has much more effective capability to to be able to segment and isolate portions of your LAN, set up firewall rules, etc., to manage the traffic, the flow between how devices communicate, etc. Which is really nice if, for instance, you want to isolate things like your Internet of Things devices. Maybe you have a guest network that you want to be able to manage. All of that stuff is pretty, it's all there to be able to set up, and you can then, ensure that you don't have anything happening in the way that you don't want to on your network. The UDM-Pro, again, does have other applications. I only have 2 currently running. But I can add in or change those applications as well. Now, if I go over, here's an example where this is the network controller running on a Azure virtual machine. This is kind of set up as a bit of a testing point here. And so you can see, again, it's a similar sort of structure. And this is an example. Now, this is a situation where this is just managing access points for this location. So that's part of the reason what you see here is so limited. Now, one of the nice things about having a cloud-based type, a cloud-based network controller is it does multi-site management. And so in this instance, there's just a single location here. This is kind of a test environment, but you could have multiple different locations that you manage. So let's say you have a rental cabin or a family cabin, and you manage the network there, and you're also managing your home. Maybe you have multiple offices in physical locations. This is a way to set it up that you can look at it across across multiple locations with the network controller, and you don't have to be as bought into the full Unifi solution approach. It's gotten harder to be able to set these up. I had to use a community-based script to be able to get this installed. This is installed on a Linux virtual machine on Ubuntu, and it seems like Unifi generally is not managing or pushing this area, and they are really focused on trying to drive into that kind of all-in stack of all of their equipment. So I'm going to show what that looks like as well, and kind of that'll help wrap us up. But that's kind of the overview of how to think about that Unifi network controller. And again, if I come back and look at a kind of an all-in system, it's a much more robust lens, and it has a lot more detail around what's going on within your network. Let's talk a little bit about the direction Ubiquiti is taking the Unifi product line, because they are making a bit of a pivot where historically it was, we've got access points, switches, routers, and a single pane of glass solution. really nicely put together. Their access points and their switches are very reasonably priced for the features, the functionality, and the reliability that they have. They're actually really nice devices. And what we've seen is a bit more of a shift where the prior approach had a little bit more flexibility in terms of how it was set up. Now they're working to kind of provide this broad range end-to-end solution that covers not just networking but a lot of additional components. So let's dive on into that right here. And so this is the Unifi store, and you can see they're kind of showing this all-in view. So up at the top you've got a UDM-Pro or UDM-Pro SE. You have your network switches here. These are little keystone or patch panels. And down at the bottom, you've got their redundant power supply solution as well. So they've really started to move to this consolidated lens. And so this is, what we're talking about, where they have multiple applications now that they're prioritizing. They have the networking item, which we talked about previously, Protect, which is their security camera solution. Now that can be run through the UDM-Pro, or you can get devices, their UNVRs, which are their Ubiquiti or Unifi Network video recorders that can manage the actual storage and management of the actual cameras. And then they have the Talk, the Access, and the Connect, which is kind of the ID, but there's some VPN components and automated Wi-Fi sign-on that they've also started to add into this infrastructure. And they're really, really pushing to get folks to, buy their core UDM-Pro devices, have that be a starting point, and then, build out a full end-to-end. Whereas their prior approach, you could get, Ubiquiti networking equipment. You can get their switches. You might get, a very basic router like an edge router or something like that. Or you could use someone else's device, and then you could, add in, maybe a Blue Iris-based NVR, other types of items. And they're really trying to push to this consolidated tool set. And it's a nice tool set. Their pricing is pretty reasonable for what you're going to get for all the different products that you get together, but you're kind of buying into their infrastructure and their system, and they're not as full-fledged capable as what you see from more enterprise-grade equipment when it comes to the actual firewall, flexibility integrations with other solutions and products. That's where there's a bit of a challenge. So again, I'm just going to show this Unifi OS console section so you can get a feel for it. But really, this is what they're trying to drive everyone into, is to using one of their OS consoles. And that's really the push. So it's all around the Dream Machine, which kind of covers everything. You have the Dream Router, which can cover some of the applications, does have some additional capability, but you're limited on how many you can run. And then you've got the Cloud Keys, which are really, again, they can cover the Protect, the Access. These devices really are really just kind of managing the software application, and they aren't, you aren't managing the routing and switching with it, but this small device allows you to manage all those pieces. And so that's kind of the shift. That's the push. And then they do also have a cloud console, which is a cloud-based solution for that network controller that you can get at an enterprise level. So this is the push. What you find, a lot of IT organizations, MSPs, etc., they really like the access points. I know I like the access points. I like the switches, but the routing and the gateway piece is a little bit challenging. And so oftentimes they may just use those kind of downstream items and use something different for the routing component. So hopefully that was helpful and gave you a little bit of a sense of how to think about the Unifi platform. Again, I think there's certain things that it does really, really well. Unifi Protect, their cameras are expensive, but it is a nice system, and they've done a pretty good job after some very bumpy software patches and software just base applications. They've iterated and refined those products. Still more work to be done, but I've actually been impressed with the speed of updates and enhancements and increased stability. As I've been using this, I've had that UDM-Pro in my house for 2 years at this point, and it's worked pretty well. Protect was rough, networking worked really well, and Protect started rough, and now has really been incredibly stable for me. So hope that helps. If you have any questions, follow-up items that you'd like to dig into, or subjects you want to explore further, leave a comment. Definitely would be interested to see what folks want to learn more about. Hope you like, and if you enjoy the content, please subscribe as well. Have a good one.